Hi guys, I'm Woodcraft Hamster and welcome back to my beginner's guide to wood carving. Now I want to talk about a topic today that I get asked about quite a lot, and that is what can I use to carve on. So we're talking about carving stumps, carving blocks, that kind of thing, and really I just thought I'd explain a little bit about what's good to use, what's not good to use, and possibly even where you can get them from. So if you've watched any of my carving videos, you'll know that I have this really nice, very large pine stump in my workshop that works really well for me, and this is kind of the holy grail of carving stumps in my mind. Now I was very fortunate, a neighbour of mine had a very large tree cut down a few years back, and I was very nicely given the chance to take a piece, and that's where this came from. Now this is a softwood which is ideal for carving on because especially when you're doing things like axe work, your axe will be striking the top of this very regularly. Now with a hardwood, although it's doable, it just means it puts more of an impact on the edge of your axe, and you really, you want to be limiting that as much as is possible. So a nice softwood like pine or something similar is very good for that. Now I appreciate a lot of people will not have space for something like this, or even just the opportunity to get one. Now I carved on many different carving blocks for many years until I was able to acquire this, which I'm very thankful for. But prior to that I was using other things, and I've got a couple of similar examples here, and I'll move on to that in a second. So as I say, you really want a softwood if at all possible, and more importantly than that, you need to be 100% clear that there's nothing inside the wood, and I'm talking things like wire, nails, screws, anything that's got into it that's going to actively damage your tools. So not just your axes, but any other bladed tools that are going to be impacting the top, so chisels, gouges, that kind of thing. Now I was lucky enough that this was fresh cut and I was able to check it over, and I've only ever used this face of it because the other face of it has sat on the floor. It's got stones and grit and etc. So that's another important thing, is if you are using a carving stump, make sure that you keep the top of it very clean. Don't do other things on there. Don't file things on there, which I appreciate you've probably seen me do on some of my videos. So again, do as I say, not what I do. But you need to keep this as clean as possible. Don't stand on it. Don't put dirty things on it. I mean, this particular round here has actually been sitting on my workshop floor. It's covered in dirt. There's probably bits of grit and small stones in there as well, which is why it's laying that way and I haven't stood it on end. So keeping it clean is very important. So what can you do if you don't have access to a big old stump like this? Well, I've got a couple of smaller options here which I don't actually use very often, but I'm just going to swing the camera around just to show you very quickly. Those are two slightly smaller stumps. Both of those were acquired from a tree surgeon, and I just happened to be passing by in the car, and the guy had chopped down a relatively large-ish tree. Said, look, any chance I could pinch a little section of it? They were very happy to do so. So keep your eye out for tree surgeons. Even have a look through your local yellow pages or something and find some local tree surgeons. Give them a call. If they've got something lying around or they know they're going to cut a tree down later that week, they may well save one for you. A lot of them will do it for free. If not, you can always offer to essentially give them a drink for it, £10, £20, whatever. Just say, can you keep one aside? I'll pop down and collect it. If you want them to deliver it to you, you may have to work out some kind of a deal, but they're normally very happy to oblige. And I've said this before in this series, tree surgeons really are a goldmine, not just for stumps and things, but for fresh green wood, things you can use for carving. Alternatively, if you can't go down that route for any reason, but you're able to harvest your own wood, and again, bear in mind you need permission to do so. But if there's a tree that's been blown over in stormy weather, for a neighbour or locally, even in your local woodland, if you're allowed to harvest wood, something this kind of size will do you perfectly well. And I'll give you a bit of a close-up on this. Now this is a piece of seasoned oak, so I wouldn't actually recommend using this, but something this size and shape will be perfectly good. Alternatively, you've got this piece of eucalyptus here. Now it's not in the best of condition. It was cut with a chainsaw very clearly for both top and bottom, and it's all a bit wonky. that's absolutely fine. You know, what you can do is you can take your normal everyday saw, you can level it off at the bottom, level it off at the top, and really what you're looking for is stability. So when you're carving, what you don't want is something like this where it's going to move around every time you hit it with the axe, because it's going to make you extremely inaccurate. More importantly, it's not very safe. And safety is the key here. But anything this kind of size, this kind of sort of diameter and weight and length, etc., and height is going to be ideal. And there's a couple of things you can do with these. Obviously, you don't really want to put this directly on the floor, because then you need to be kneeling down and all the rest of it and messing around. And actually, you know, that's not particularly safe. And I'll be honest, I've tried it in the past and you will absolutely do your back in. 2 hours of carving on something like this, kneeling down on the floor, and you will be crippled for the rest of the day. So what can you do? There's a couple of things. You can either build something up, whether that's using, you know, constructing something out of timber and then putting it on top, or, you know, one of the things I did many years ago, I had no garden to speak of, just a very small kind of alleyway down the side of my house, and I piled up a load of paving slabs. I then put a bucket on top of that filled with sand, and I had something around about this kind of diameter, and I kind of wedged it into the sand so it was as secure as I could make it, packed it round the sides, and that was my carving stump. And actually it worked out really, really well. Yes, you can't do the big elaborate massive projects, and well, you sort of can, but it's a lot more difficult. But things like carving spoons and smaller items and spatulas and that kind of thing, it works really, really well. What are the other options? What can you do if you don't have access to something like this? Well, you can go down to a local DIY store and you can buy some pre-cut dried timber, you know, talking like 2x4s or bigger, even things like fence posts and stuff, but you know, so you do need to be careful there's no nails or screws or anything in them. And what you can do is something very similar. I've seen this done in a couple of ways. You can either build like a little frame, which is not particularly difficult to do. You know, most people can manage it with some screws and a power drill or something along those lines. Now, what you need to bear in mind again, and I can't emphasise this point enough, is that you do really need to be careful of where you put your screws. Don't put them in via the top as a starter for 10, because eventually you will wear down the wood and you'll get down to the screws. So really you should be coming in from the side, maybe at an angle from the bottom, but keeping as much depth as you can of the screws away from the top of the wood. And if you start getting kind of half of the way down, you know, think about replacing that top section. Alternatively, you can get sort of 4x2s or better yet something sort of fence post size, and you can get maybe 4 bits of it, or you know, maybe even more, maybe 9 bits of it or something like that, so it forms a square. And then from quite low down you can drill it in and you can screw it in together. You can get something like a ratchet strap and kind of really pull it all in from the middle so that you've got everything closed in on the top. And that will give you a surface you can work on. So you really do have lots of options here. You know, ideally I think most people will look at a stump, and there is something quintessential about using a stump for carving on, but if you don't have that option because they're not available, you can buy relatively cheaply, you know, construction style timber. You can even sort of utilise, you know, if you've got an old bed that you're throwing away that's got lots of pine slats on it, it's not the ideal, but you could put those together and form a kind of a tabletop, if you like, that again can go on something you've built up or what have you. And really it's just about making sure that it's stable, that it's not going to wobble around too much. You know, I've even seen people using things like butcher's blocks. Personally, I don't recommend them. Butcher's blocks are generally made of hard wood, and they are designed to take a lot of abuse from bladed tools. Now, the type of thing that you're doing with a kitchen knife, which has a very fine blade on it, you know, so, you know, in theory that's not going to be a problem, but the type of work you're doing with an axe, you're impacting that block a lot harder than you would with general cutting and chopping with the kitchen knife. So if it was me, I would try to avoid them unless you have no other choice. So that's just my thing. Maybe what you could do is take a butcher's block and actually get a nice piece of pine board or something like that and screw that via the corners into the butcher's block, so you get your stability and you've got a nice weighty base to it, but you've got a nice soft wood covering on top. So those are just a few ideas from me that might help you out if you're looking for something to use as a carving block. As I say, you've got a wealth of options. Google is your friend here. You can have a look around, see what other people have done, but those are primarily the options that I would use. So I hope it's been useful, guys. Comments and questions in the box below. Hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I hope you'll all join me next time. Cheers, guys.